Here's the truth: your greatest enemy is not the person who doubts you. It's not the competitor trying to outwork you. It's not even the people who tell you you'll never make it. Your greatest enemy is staring back at you in the mirror every single morning. The problem we're going to solve today is simple but brutal. How do you defeat yourself? How do you silence the excuses, the fears, the laziness, and become the version of yourself capable of creating something that lasts? Steve Jobs lived this war every single day, and from his darkest lessons, we can see what it truly means when it's you versus you. The world will try to convince you that your greatest enemy is outside of you. They'll tell you it's the competition, the market, the doubters, or the people who don't believe in your vision. But Steve Jobs knew the truth. Your greatest enemy is not out there. It's in here. The hardest battle you will ever fight is with yourself. Think about it. Every single morning when you wake up, there's a voice inside you that tries to negotiate with your potential. It tells you to sleep a little longer, to take the easier option, to push your dream to tomorrow. That voice is subtle, but it's powerful. It's not the loud critic outside, it's the whisper within. And Jobs understood that until you learn to silence that whisper, you will always be at war with yourself. Jobs wasn't fighting against IBM or Microsoft or the boardroom when they doubted him. His real battle was with the voice in his head that told him to give in, to compromise, to accept the ordinary. He refused. That's why he was different. He understood that the self is both the greatest weapon and the greatest obstacle, and he chose to turn that battle into fuel. He often spoke about perseverance, about continuing when most people quit. But here's the dark truth: quitting doesn't come from the outside world. Quitting comes from within. It's not the critic who breaks you. It's not the failure that stops you. It's the moment you agree with the voice that says you're not good enough, not ready, not capable. That's the moment you lose. Jobs didn't allow himself that agreement. He fought himself every single day. When Apple pushed him out, the easy voice inside him said, "You've done enough. You've built something great. Walk away." But the stronger voice inside him, the one he had forged through discipline and pain, said, "No, you're not done. You still have something to give." That's the battle of you versus you. Not giving in to the weaker version of yourself, even when it feels easier to let go. The enemy within takes many forms. It's fear, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not being good enough. Jobs faced all of those fears, but instead of running from them, he exposed them. He put them on the table and used them as fuel. Because here's the truth: fear doesn't disappear. Doubt doesn't vanish. They live inside you forever. The only choice is whether you let them control you or you use them to sharpen you. That's what made Jobs different. He didn't pretend the inner enemy wasn't there. He acknowledged it. And then he went to war with it every day. That's why he demanded so much from himself and from everyone around him. He knew the real competition wasn't in the marketplace. It was in the mirror. And this is where most people fail. They think they're battling society, or bosses, or competitors. But the truth is, they've lost before they ever begin. Because they can't defeat themselves. They can't defeat the part of them that chooses distraction over discipline. They can't defeat the part that chooses comfort over growth. They can't defeat the part that chooses excuses over execution. That's why so few people ever reach greatness. Jobs lived with this awareness. He knew that his most dangerous enemy wasn't Bill Gates, or investors, or the critics who wrote him off. His most dangerous enemy was the weaker version of himself. The version that could have been chosen to settle. The version that could have walked away when things got hard. The version that could have listened to the whispers of doubt instead of the roar of vision. And so every day, he chose to fight that battle. Every day, he chose to face the mirror and say, "Not today, you versus you." That's the fight that matters. It's the fight Jobs lived. It's the fight that separates the extraordinary from the ordinary. And it's the only fight that will ever define who you become. Desire is cheap. Everyone has it. Everyone wants to succeed. Everyone wants to be admired. And everyone wants to make an impact. Desire is easy to talk about. It's easy to dream about. But Steve Jobs understood something most people never will. Desire doesn't build anything. Desire doesn't create the impossible. Desire doesn't change the world. What changes the world is discipline. Discipline is what separates the ones who only want from the ones who actually do. Jobs wasn't driven by fleeting bursts of motivation. He was driven by an unshakable discipline to show up, to push harder, to demand more when others were ready to quit. He understood that the gap between vision and reality is crossed only by those who have the discipline to keep walking when every step feels unbearable. Think about this. Desire says, "I want to build something great." Discipline says, "I will put in the relentless hours, the endless iterations, the painful revisions until it becomes great." Desire says, "I want to be successful." Discipline says, "I will sacrifice comfort, stability, and approval to carve out success on my own terms." Jobs lived inside that discipline. He sacrificed convenience. He rejected the easy way. He refused to compromise when the vision demanded more. When Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, the company was drowning. Most people would have settled for survival, but Jobs didn't. His discipline demanded excellence, not mediocrity. He stripped away everything that wasn't essential. He cut down product lines, eliminated distractions, and focused with surgical precision. Desire alone would have never done that. Desire would have chased popularity or quick wins. Discipline carved a new foundation. And here's the part most people don't want to hear. Discipline is not glamorous. It's not the highlight reel you see in documentaries or the speeches you remember. Discipline is boring. It's painful. It's invisible. It's saying no to distractions 1,000 times in silence. It's working on details nobody will notice because you know the difference is real. Jobs was obsessed with the unseen, the details under the surface that customers would never recognize consciously, but would feel deeply. That obsession came from discipline, not desire. Discipline is what forces you to keep pushing when every cell in your body screams to stop. Jobs didn't always feel like innovating. He didn't always feel like being bold. He didn't always feel like fighting battles against boards, critics, and even his own failures. But discipline carried him through those moments when desire would have given up. That's the real lesson. If you rely on desire, you will fail, because desire fades, it burns out. It disappears the moment things get hard. But discipline, it's a muscle. It grows stronger every time you use it. Jobs trained that muscle relentlessly. When his designs were rejected, when his ideas seemed too radical, when he was pushed out of his own company, discipline pulled him forward. He didn't need permission. He didn't need applause. He needed only the inner fire to keep going, no matter how difficult it became. Discipline also demanded honesty, brutal honesty. Jobs had the discipline to look at a product, a strategy, even a person, and say, "This isn't good enough." Not because he wanted to be cruel, but because he refused to let desire for harmony or approval compromise the standard. He was willing to be unpopular. He was willing to be hated. Because discipline always asks the question, does this serve the vision? And if the answer was no, he cut it out. That's what most people miss. They think success is about passion or excitement. But passion without discipline burns out quickly. Excitement fades. Motivation dies. Only discipline keeps you moving through the desert when there's no applause, no recognition, no proof you're on the right path. Jobs lived inside that desert many times, but discipline made him unstoppable. Desire can make you dream, but discipline is what makes you execute. Desire can inspire you to start, but discipline is what keeps you from quitting. Jobs never relied on desire. He built his legacy on discipline. And that's why he accomplished what others only talked about. The mirror is the most dangerous object in your life. Because every morning, it reflects not who you pretend to be, not who you wish you were, but who you really are. Steve Jobs lived by this brutal truth. He believed the mirror test was the only test that mattered. Forget the applause, forget the critics, forget the bank account. The real question was simple. Can you look into the mirror and respect the person staring back at you? Jobs wasn't obsessed with competing against others. He was obsessed with competing against himself. The mirror didn't lie to him. It showed him whether he was living with integrity to his vision or whether he was drifting into compromise. And here's the thing, most people avoid this test. They hide from it. They distract themselves with noise, with validation, with excuses. Because the mirror exposes everything. The shortcuts you took, the lies you told yourself, the potential you wasted. Jobs refused to live with that hypocrisy. He was relentless with the mirror test. Every day, he asked himself, am I doing work that matters? Am I building something worth my one short life? Or am I just passing time? That's why he was so ruthless with his time, his energy, and his choices. He didn't want to wake up at 50, 60, 70 years old and realize that the person in the mirror was a fraud. That's what made him uncompromising. When he looked at a product and felt it was wrong, he didn't let it slide. Because if he allowed something flawed to go forward, he would fail his own reflection. That was unacceptable to him. The mirror test forced him to hold a higher standard, not because of the world's opinion, but because of his own. Now here's the dark truth. Most people don't fail because the world beats them. They fail because they can't face themselves. They can't admit that they're cutting corners. They can't admit that they've stopped growing. They can't admit that they've settled for mediocrity. And every day, they look into the mirror and lie. They tell themselves it's fine. They tell themselves it's enough. But deep down, they know the reflection is calling them out. Jobs never allowed himself that comfort. He asked the hardest questions. If today were the last day of my life, would I be happy with what I'm about to do? That's the ultimate mirror test. It strips away excuses. It silences desire. It reveals the truth. If the answer was no too many days in a row, he knew something had to change. Because life is too short to keep lying to your own reflection. The mirror test demands courage. It demands that you stop blaming the economy, your boss, your upbringing, or the critics outside. It forces you to ask, am I doing the best I can with what I've been given? Am I honoring my vision? Or am I hiding from the work I know I should be doing? Jobs believed this was the only real accountability. The mirror. Because the world can be fooled. People can be impressed. But the reflection staring back at you cannot be deceived. It knows the truth. And the greatest power you can ever develop is the ability to confront that truth without flinching. Most people won't pass that test. They'll avoid it. They'll decorate their lives with distractions so they never have to sit alone with the reflection. But those who dare to confront it, those who dare to measure themselves against their own potential, they are the ones who rise above. Jobs was one of them. He lived and died by that measure. The mirror test is not about perfection. It's about honesty. It's about standing in front of yourself and admitting whether you're living up to your vision or betraying it. And if the answer is uncomfortable, you don't look away. You make the change. Jobs did that every single day. And that's why his reflection was never a stranger. It was his greatest judge, his greatest ally, and his darkest teacher. Most people think legacy is about what the world remembers after you're gone. A name etched in history books, a building, a company, a fortune. But Steve Jobs understood a darker, deeper truth. Your legacy doesn't begin after death. It begins every single day, in every single choice. The legacy within is the story you tell yourself when no one else is watching. Jobs didn't wake up thinking about statues, biographies, or praise. He woke up thinking about whether he was living in alignment with his vision. He knew that the legacy within, your internal measure, always comes before the legacy the world gives you. And if the inside is hollow, the outside is fake, think about it. How many people spend their lives chasing approval? They work not for the work itself, but for applause, for validation, for recognition. They build their identity on how others respond to them. But here's the truth. The crowd forgets. The applause fades. The awards collect dust. And when it's just you and the mirror, none of it matters. Jobs refused to live for applause. He lived for the standard within. The legacy within is built in silence. It's built when you choose discipline over desire, when you pass the mirror test, when you keep going even when no one is cheering. Jobs knew the world would only see the tip of the iceberg. The products, the keynotes, the breakthroughs. But what gave those things life were the unseen choices. The nights of obsession, the ruthless decisions, the sacrifices nobody applauded. That was his real legacy. The world saw the iPhone. He saw the years of uncompromising commitment that gave birth to it. Here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. The legacy within isn't about how much you achieve. It's about who you become in the process. Jobs wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. He clashed with people. He failed. But he never betrayed his inner standard. That's what made his legacy powerful. He could look within and know he didn't compromise the essence of what he believed. Legacy isn't out there. It's in here, inside you. The question is not, will the world remember me? The question is, will I respect myself for how I lived? Because the cruelest punishment is not being forgotten by others. It's being forgotten by yourself. Jobs lived with this weight. He knew time was limited. Every day could be his last. That urgency forced him to ask, am I building something that matters to me? Or am I wasting what little time I have? The legacy within doesn't wait for history to judge you. It judges you now. When you cut corners, when you give up, when you settle, you chip away at it. And when you rise, when you stand firm, when you keep pushing despite the odds, you build it. Brick by brick, choice by choice. Jobs lived like that until the end. Even in sickness, even when his body was failing. His mind stayed aligned with the work he believed in. Because his legacy wasn't just the company he built. It wasn't just the devices in people's hands. It was the fire he carried within himself. The refusal to waste life on mediocrity. The refusal to betray his inner vision. That's why his story resonates long after he's gone. Because it wasn't just about Apple. It wasn't just about innovation. It was about the deeper battle, you versus you. The world saw his products, but he knew the real masterpiece was invisible. The real masterpiece was the legacy he carried inside himself, the standard he refused to lower, the fire he refused to let die. And that's the same choice waiting for you. Every day, every decision. What legacy are you building within? Not for them, not for the applause, but for you, for the reflection you can't escape, for the standard only you can set, for the life only you can live. In the end, Steve Jobs understood something most people never dare to face. The real battle is not with the world, not with the competition, not with the doubters, it's with yourself. The enemy is not out there, it's in here. The fear, the excuses, the laziness, the compromises. That's the war you fight every day, and that's the war that decides everything. You saw it in his life. The discipline that turned chaos into clarity. The brutal honesty of the mirror test stripped away lies. The legacy within that refused to bend for applause. And the fire that burned so fiercely, even when the world couldn't see it. Even when his body was failing. This wasn't about perfection. It was about integrity. About choosing to rise above your weaker self, over and over again. Jobs lived with urgency because he knew time was limited. Every day was borrowed. That awareness didn't weaken him, it sharpened him. It forced him to face the hardest questions. Am I doing what matters? Am I giving my all? Am I building a life I can respect when the mirror stares back at me? And when the answer was no, he changed. He didn't wait. He didn't excuse. He didn't lie to himself. He confronted the truth, and he acted. That's the darkest lesson of all. You don't get to run from yourself. You don't get to hide from the reflection. You don't get to cheat time. Every cut corner, every wasted hour, every moment of compromise, it all shows up in the mirror. And one day you'll have to face it. Jobs refused to lose that battle. He refused to betray the standard within. That's why his life wasn't just about technology. It was about power. The power to master himself. You versus you. That's the fight. And here's the truth: the world doesn't care who wins. The applause won't save you. The critics won't destroy you. The only judge that matters is the one staring back from the glass. Jobs lived by that truth. He built on that truth. He died by that truth. The question is, will you?